Oh, hey everyone. It's Ryder from Skip. It's great to have so many of you tuning in today for a special webinar. Really happy and grateful to have Alex on, who's a director at the SBA. I'll give a quick intro background on you, Alex, because you've been a major part of the EIDL program since it started. You've been at the SBA a long time. At the SBA and in the Office of Capital Access, which is in charge of all of these programs that are affecting millions of people. So, and you've done just an incredible job. Off the bat, I want to say thank you for how much you and your team has done over the past couple of years. I know you've been a great resource, helping clarify what people need to know. And I know it's been a challenge. So really grateful to have you. And thanks for taking a few minutes to join us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite. Always happy to help out when we can. Thanks, Ryder.
Yeah. And it's, you in particular, I like to look at the data. I read the testimonies. And the reason we wanted to have you on today is we're entering a new EIDL phase. So that's what we're going to get into. But I want to talk about the journey to getting where we are today. And then also Patrick Kelly, who's in charge of your office. He had interesting testimony earlier this week. But yeah, would love to kind of hear as an introduction, where we're at with the EIDL program at a high level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, and if I can just kind of go, look back a little bit on where we started with this back in March of 2020. We took this really, small program that not a lot of people knew about, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which provides working capital to small businesses and nonprofits. And it's a part of the other disaster loans that we offer following declarations. And at the time COVID started, SBA actually didn't have the statutory authority to declare a pandemic. It wasn't even the type of disaster that we could declare. We had to get special statutory authority from Congress in order to do that. So they did that right away in early March, and we right away began declaring all of the states and territories and the District of Columbia. And then before you knew it, this COVID EIDL program got underway and was available to small businesses and nonprofits to start applying. By the time we got to, let's say it was June or July, we had already provided over $160 billion in COVID EIDL loans. So we were off to a really fast start. But the previous administration did something that was a little strange, and they held in place a loan limit for the COVID EIDL program. People probably remember this who followed the journey all the way along, like the way you guys did. They limited the loans to just 6 months of working capital, up to a maximum of $150,000. So by the end of the summer, the loan approval activity had really flattened out, and we were, now only approving, smaller increases or, smaller dollar loans. And they held that limit in place all the way through the end of their tenure, when they left in January of 2021. And then the new administration came in, and within days of being sworn in, Administrator Guzman increased the loan limits up to 2 years of working capital and a maximum of $500,000. And then had said at the time, it was also our intention to increase that further up to the full statutory limit of $2 million, which they eventually did later on that summer. And so from that time, we had a lot of pent up demand, that increase requests were coming in, reconsiderations. And so then by the time June or July of 21 comes around, we finally start making real progress on that backlog of requests that were coming in. And then we see another big jump going from where we had kind of like hovered around $200 billion in loan approvals for COVID EIDL to where we're at now, which is over $390 billion. So, really before the current administration came into office, the program activity had really just kind of like flattened out. And there wasn't any evidence that I saw where they had intended to really re-jumpstart that. But the current administration did that. And I think the reason I bring that up is because I heard this in the in the testimony from some of the questions, and then also from just other chatter that's out there, that somehow SBA kind of like prematurely closed this program, right? Or that we were in a rush to close this without trying to reach as many people as possible. And I just don't think that's the case. And I think when you go back and look at, all of the things that we did in order to try and maximize the loans, it's all to the contrary. We were really trying to get as much assistance out there as possible, which is why we took those steps to increase the loan limits. And what we're left with now, where they discussed at the hearing, is just those remaining files that came in under the deadline that we were unable to approve. Right? We have some that were approved and they're obligated, and the funds are there waiting. As Patrick Kelly said, we don't require any more documentation on those. We're just waiting for the borrowers to finish executing the loan closing documents, and then we can issue the final disbursement. But then there's also, some thousands of files that are, just we're unable to approve them. And he talked a lot about the issue of taxes, tax transcripts or tax records, that are the main obstacle for us to being able to do that.
I do want to get to those 40,000. This is what Patrick Kelly said in his testimony, the 40,000 or so that are still pending. And I know for the folks who tune in who are still waiting, that's obviously top of mind for them. But just to echo that history that you outlined, as you said, in spring 2021, right? If the only 200 billion, there was really no movement until those policy decisions were made to say increase to 500 in 24 months of working capital, increase to 2 million. And that was the jump. One of the things that stood out to me in the hearing, according to Mr. Kelly, was that everyone who was eligible for more money was emailed. Yet I think only 20% of folks came back and said took advantage of that, which is really interesting. It points to the importance of communication. I'm sure that some percentage of those people, if they had known they had an opportunity, but I think you definitely started to communicate a lot quicker, a lot more in 2021. So I just want to emphasize that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another example of where we really tried to maximize the amount of assistance that we could get out for this program. And we wanted to make sure that if somebody hadn't reached the maximum eligible loan amount yet, meaning there was still some remaining funds of eligibility that they had, that they were aware of this coming deadline, and that they had every opportunity to make that request, and that we would review that. There was a very strong effort to get that campaign out, and so people were aware of it, and it increased the activity. Obviously, some people did respond. The numbers we're talking about, like you mentioned, he says only 20% of the people, that had eligibility there, responded to that request and actually requested an increase. That's still a lot of people. A lot of people aren't aware, but the COVID EIDL program generated over 121 million applications, which is, just a tremendous number of applications to be coming in for the program.
That's incredible. Because as far as I know, I haven't seen that published.
I'm sorry, 21.1 million, not 120.
Okay,
21.1 million, yeah, applications came in, and yeah, it's not a number that we push out there a lot. We tend to just try and focus on the number of loans that we've approved and the dollar amount, and so that way people are aware of what the movement is. But there were a lot of applications that were coming in. There are some duplicates in there. They talked about it during the hearing, how some people, the application was fairly simple to complete. And so people, if they made a mistake on it, or, they hadn't heard back something in a while, sometimes, they just decided, well, or maybe even on bad advice from somebody, I'll complete a second application with the correct information, and hopefully that one will go through, but it would get flagged as a duplicate. But yeah, a lot of applications activity.
Absolutely. And a lot of those, of course, were just for the grants. I wonder how many of those were just for the targeted and supplemental. But I don't know.
Oh, meaning that was their main interest in just
Right.
obtaining the grant, but they had to complete a loan application in order to start that process. Right. There were a lot of those as well.
Yeah. And the other, I'm glad just to reemphasize the magnitude, that's always the point. This is unprecedented. 4 million, nearly 4 million borrowers, $380 billion, according to the latest data. And by the way, I think it was your team, was great at putting out weekly numbers. And this is, this because you followed us, but I was covering the trajectory every week, and I saw when those jumps happened, when those approvals happened. So really great to see that. And I know a lot of the folks watching here were following that closely for their personal issues. So before we talk about the new phase, and then for those 40,000 people that are still stuck, I did want to also bring up what Patrick Kelly talked a lot about in his hearing, was the prior administration, the prior policy the CARES Act rather, to not look at tax transcripts, to not have to look at tax transcripts. And that's the major issue why people were delayed in the second round, because there was now a requirement to say we need tax returns, and that's why everyone heard 4506T a million times.
Yeah, so it was that was a major shift that I don't think at the beginning really got a lot of attention, right? And so it confused people who were then seeking an increase on top of the other loan that they were able to obtain with absolutely no documentation, just based on their own self-certification and stated revenue and cost of goods sold. So with the CARES Act, we were required, to process those applications based on the self-certification to determine if the business was an eligible entity. And then also we were prohibited from obtaining tax records. So we were basing them just on credit score. But then with the Economic Aid Act in December of 2020, that gets changed. And now we must determine eligibility based on the tax records. And so we start incorporating that into our process. And so that becomes all of a sudden a change, because now people who maybe were late in filing their taxes, or realized that what they had stated on their application isn't what they had in their taxes, and so they wanted to go back and amend them. There was a rush of people that all of a sudden had to, were very urgently trying to get these changes made, or maybe even a return filed for the first time for their business. And so it was problematic. And like Patrick said, now you understand why people were confused. And, when they were said, well, you're not eligible because of what we're finding in your application doesn't seem, it's like, well, you already gave me a loan. You've already determined that I'm eligible. You've already determined that I'm, that I can be approved for a loan. But those were based on other criteria from the CARES Act.
Absolutely. So yeah, and one of his remarks was like, when you're taking something away, your expectation was that it wasn't required, but now all of a sudden it was required. So that's why, right? I mean, a lot of folks felt the way they did.
Right.
But so going back to, because a lot of our audience has received EIDL loans, and we did a survey back in February, a couple thousand applicants that found, I think 80% of businesses in that survey said that without the EIDL loan, and I'm not throwing softballs here, but but it's basically saying that it saved their business. So a lot of good data there that showed the support for the increases, 24 months of working capital. But for those 40,000 folks that are still waiting, and also the others who maybe finally got funding, but it wasn't the easiest process, would love to hear more about, the details now, right? The portal shut down. There's some approvals by mail, doing mail correspondence. Would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Right. So yeah, like Patrick said, we're still trying to close those remaining loans that are obligated, and the funds are there waiting. Those funds aren't going anywhere. We're not going to, cancel those and move them or something like that. But we do want those borrowers to provide the loan closing documents, so that way we can get those disbursements underway. We're also working through some that are bank return issues, right? And they touched on this during the hearing as well. Some of our borrowers had accounts that really weren't like commercial business banking accounts, and so the banking institution might have flagged the disbursements that were coming into them, kicked them back to SBA, or for some other reason. And so we're still working with borrowers to resolve those issues. Those can take longer, even after we've resolved them. Those can sometimes, as I understand it, take 2 to 3 weeks for the disbursement to go through. But we're committed to continuing to do that. Now for the I think the number was 41,000 that they talked about. So actually go bigger than that. I think it was like a little over 60,000 applications that had come in that were missing taxes or required documents. A third of those we were able to get approved and into this, obligation stage. The 2/3, so that 40,000, are the ones that were unable to be approved. So we can't find any way now to get those files approved. And I think they were using the term in the hearing as unworkable, right? And some of the senators kind of honed in on that phrase and wanted to make sure that you didn't flag these as unworkable, and so you didn't work them, because that's not the case. We actually did review them. We did make a decision, and we are unable to approve them. So I want to make sure that everybody's clear on that those files that they were referring to as unworkable, they were in fact worked. They were right. That we did make a decision, and we cannot approve them, and that should have been communicated to those borrowers. So fortunately, that's the final determination on those. And I know that was important to the senators, that SBA was clear on that, that we didn't just leave people hanging, that we would tell them if in fact we were unable to approve their request.
Thanks for emphasizing that. Yeah, because that question was asked probably a dozen times in various forms of, are you sure you worked on it? Are you sure you worked on it? And I think one of the sub points there was, if people got a reason, so they understand. And I think that came across too, that like you'd give them a reason, as opposed to the generic, the generic, I forget what the generic, unable to process or unverifiable information. I mean, but and then Patrick Kelly, one of his quotes I remembered was, "We're unable to get to yes on those 41,000."
Yeah, and we really did. Like, I know this might be hard for some people to to understand, depending on how their own experience was, or if they're if they're watching coverage of it, and they're hearing a lot about, people, getting denied. But, we did extend a lot of the deadlines and other things that we did in order to give people multiple chances. For normal disasters, we have a policy of like just allowing for 2 appeals on a decline, right? If we make a decision, we are unable to approve it, it's declined. We give the applicant 6 months to come back and appeal that. And if they do, they come back and we decline it again, we'll give them another month to appeal that decision. In this case, we basically had waived that, and people were coming back multiple times. So even for these 40,000 that we're talking about here that were received before the application deadline, and we just were not able to approve them, a lot of those we probably had made previous decline decisions multiple times, right? And people were coming back a second, third, fourth time appealing their case, and we were reviewing it. If they were providing new information, we were looking at it. We were never telling people, sorry, you've exhausted, we already reviewed it twice and that's it. We can't do it again. So in any case, just like, and then there was the same with other things, like just the application deadline, a normal application deadline for any, disaster that we normally declare for working capital loans is about 9 months. This one was extended out, all the way to December of 2021, just for new applications. And then we went even further to allow people to continue requesting the increases or the reconsiderations past that. So we definitely did open up the window of opportunity there.
Yeah. Glad you added that. And while we shift into kind of this next phase, I think it's important because of the people who still have questions, it's around those things you're just explaining. So, and if people should have the emails in terms of who they need to, if they still have questions. And we just did a quick poll that showed half the folks watching receiving the EIDL loan, half didn't. So this is who's watching now.
Okay.
So, but for those 50% who did receive, I do want to talk about the new phase. There's a couple things because I know we have a few minutes left, but beyond EIDL, 4 million people need to start making payments starting in October. Not everyone then, but I think 30K then, and then 500,000 in the preceding 2 months. So what can people expect? Are any changes to the system, things you can share now?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, you're absolutely right. This is really important because we're at this pivotal, next stage of the COVID EIDL program. We've got just about 4 million borrowers in this program, which is double what we have approved in the disaster loan program in the entire history of the agency. Before COVID, we had done about 2 million disaster loan approvals for all the disasters that SBA had declared in the agency's history. And then all of a sudden with COVID EIDL, we've doubled that just with this, with this one pandemic. So it's definitely going to be, a major task here to service these loans. And the important thing for borrowers to know is that the deferment period is coming to an end. Hopefully everybody's aware that we did do multiple extensions of the deferment period up to 30 months, but that is the last one. And so there's not going to be another deferment on top of that for everyone. So these are coming into repayment and they should prepare themselves. And the way they can do that is to go on to sba.gov/pay and follow the instructions there. The first thing that they should be doing is setting up a CAFS account, and there's instructions on the page on how to do that. But that will allow them to check and see the payment amounts and when they're due, so that way they can plan accordingly. And you're right, these are going to start to happen very quickly here. It's a small group here at first, but within 6 months of that group, 3/4 of all of the loan approvals, so over 3 million, the deferment period is going to be over and they're going to be in repayment. So a lot of people we'll start to go into that stage very quickly. And then there's also instructions on there on how they can make the payments on pay.gov. So,
Right.
and you asked, what can they expect in the future? And Patrick talked about this in the hearing a little bit. Is we have our site set right now on improving the customer portal for them. All right. I can't share a bunch of details on that right now because it's still being developed. But the idea is to have all of the SBA programs on a universal lending platform and to really improve the entire customer experience. So from going to applying for these programs to the servicing of the loans, checking your accounts and everything, having that all centralized rather than having to go to these different channels in order to do that. Because a lot of our programs have been on different platforms. The disaster loans were on a separate platform than what the other like guaranteed loan programs are on. So being able to check, where a business might have accounts for different programs under SBA is a little bit difficult. And that's part of the reasoning why the administrator moved the disaster loan program to the Office of Capital Access. So that way we could have everything, centrally located under one program office, and they can make all of the necessary improvements in order to best benefit our customers, including the disaster survivors.
Looking forward to that. And especially, I think maybe lender match improvements are a part of that. And because, that's great to make it easier for people to repay. And of course, I know there'll be more announcements coming up September, October before, because there's 2 months to help tell 4 million people how to get things, how to do things correctly. So I know that's it's a short time in development.
Yeah. So right now, our borrowers out there right now will start to notice, especially the ones that got the loans earlier in the pandemic, they're receiving emails from us instructing them to go set up the CAFS account to look and see when their payment is becoming due, where to go in order to set up a payment. And then we're monitoring who's setting up those accounts. And if they're not responding to the nudge, that we're giving them through the email campaign, then they might be the recipients of, an auto dialer campaign message or something like that. So we just want to make sure, we're kind of hitting all the different channels and not just relying on emails alone. And then also you're going to hear the same message too from our other offices who will be reminding borrowers about this next step. Go to sba.gov/pay and make sure you're following all the recommended steps in order to make payments on time.
Absolutely. And we'll be repeating that a lot too, because I know that's this is the huge area I do want to end on the other programs that are under your office, Office Capital Access, 7A Microloans 504, because, our data and surveys, this is qualitatively obvious too. People still need help. So, if you had to say, I know we can't dive too deep here, but just other programs that should be on people's radars that they should be thinking about or considering. Oh,
absolutely. So definitely, go to sba.gov, look at the other programs. There's, we always say in disaster, but I think this applies to small businesses just in general, is that, there really isn't any one program that's going to solve all of your needs. Chances are, you might need help from multiple programs or multiple forms of assistance. And so, if it's access to capital, if it's business counseling services, technical assistance, anything like that, SBA is the primary resource for those things. So definitely go check out those other programs. And, the one thing I think this whole experience showed us is the value of this direct disaster loan program. We had, in COVID relief, we had a lot of other programs too, right? There was the Paycheck Protection Program. There was the Restaurant Revitalization Fund grants. There's the Shuttered Venue Operators grants. And then there's others too. But the COVID EIDL program was the SBA's direct loan program. We already went through the numbers, but 3.9, close to 4 million borrowers and over $390 billion total so far. Just as like that one lender, when you look at the Paycheck Protection Program, and all of the assistance that they did, that was across more than 5,000 participating lenders, right? That it took to get those funds out. So there's definitely a need for the direct loan program option. And so we look forward to trying improving that in order to help meet people's needs. And, Patrick talked about that during the hearing is, he has this vision for seeing it to be very streamlined and to answer two critical questions that applicants have. Is this, am I approved, and when am I going to get my money? And that's the goal, is to try and streamline the assistance as quickly as possible, and then businesses can make those decisions as they need to.
I love that, and I know our community at Skip values that too, right? So they can get things done quickly and get back to their business. That's why we've been putting out videos and content and helping people directly as well, because for small businesses, all of you watching, it's and by the way, if you have questions, add them here, because Alex has offered to do some follow-up questions here and there. But for those 1-person businesses, 2-person business, 10-person businesses, you don't have all day to apply and figure out all your options. So I love that. And a couple of your colleagues at the SBA have also said it's about, whether getting funding ready. Are you ready for capital? If so, what there's steps that go in there: small business resources, getting an entity, and then getting funding. So it's amazing. One of the things I really appreciate about the pandemic was overall not good. I hope we don't have to go through it again. But now SBA is on people's radar. EIDL was a gateway. The grants were a gateway, and there's plenty of other options that I hope, and resources I hope people continue to find through you, find through us, find through other folks. I know you especially do a good job communicating with the private sector as well, which I know was really important for you guys.
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks, Ryder.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Alex. And thanks everyone who's tuned in, and hope to have you back soon, especially as repayments start. But have a great afternoon.
All right. Thank you. You too.
Bye.